How do you keep true to your faith while working in an environment that may not always get it? I'm Julie Lyles Carr, and today on the Modern Motherhood Podcast, we'll talk with Megan Alexander. Megan has a flourishing career in broadcast television. She's on Inside Edition, various news outlets, and sports broadcasting. Her road to success has been a wild ride, and she's staying true to her beliefs. This is one you don't want to miss. So, Megan, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Jules, for having me.
I just love that you're on today, and I'm getting to talk to you. You're up in Seattle at the moment because you're touring Krista Studios and getting to do some stuff, but where are you currently living, and how is all that working in your career?
Yeah, well, I've been with Inside Edition now for 10 years. It's a syndicated television news magazine show, and it's based in New York City. But for the past 5 years, I go back and forth between Nashville, Tennessee, and New York City. I was full-time in New York, and then my husband and I had our first child. And in New York City, that radically changes your world because it's incredibly expensive. And just to raise a child in New York City, you think, oh my goodness, people do it and it's amazing. But we were brainstorming, and I said, gosh, I wonder if there's a way I could commute from a city nearby, a Charlotte, a Nashville, where it would still be a short commute and I can get up here. And so we said, let's try it for 6 months. And 5 years later, I fly from Nashville up to New York and work in New York City for 3 days and fly back. And it works for our family. I have 2 little boys now. My husband is very hands-on. He's really the one that's with the kids a lot, and I'm the parent that flies and travels and commutes and has the big job, if you will. But it works for our family. We keep checking in with God and saying, this is what you want us to do, Lord, right? And he keeps confirming it. So we will continue on until we hear otherwise.
That's really cool. And I love hearing stories of women who are able to modify and customize to make things work better for their family. It's interesting you mentioned New York. Back in the day when we had just 6 kids, right? My husband had an offer to go to Manhattan. And as we started really taking a look at it, there was that initial blush of, oh, that would be so cool. And then I started actually doing the math of that many children in a walk-up somewhere that we could afford in New York. And I was like, I don't know if that's going to work. So I love you found a way to make New York still work for you, but also to work with those 2 kiddos. That's just amazing. Are you finding in the environment today that organizations are willing to be a little more flexible to begin to accommodate not just women, but we have a lot of guys too who are saying, I'm going to have some kind of better work-life balance going on, whatever that means to us. Do you find that, it's starting to become a little more receptive to that?
It's interesting, Jules, again, being back and forth between Nashville and New York, I really see both perspectives. In New York, no one blinks when I tell them what I do, because that is a city of dreamers and achievers and hustlers. And there's a lot of people there, but they just go, okay, great. In Nashville, it's still a little bit old-fashioned in the sense of the guy being the one with the big job that travels. That is indeed changing. And Nashville's certainly a city that has grown a lot over the years. So I see both. But again, when you have conversations with people, it really comes down to, if this is what God wants you to do and it's working for you, go for it. And I love that there are so many opportunities to women. And my company is nothing but supportive. CBS Television has just been awesome. So if I can say, in the secular world, we have all kinds of support. I think the church is coming around, and that's exciting and that's neat, because I'm one of those people that believes God needs all of us to take a seat at the table and do what we're called to do in this world. And hey, if that means stay home with your kiddos, that's amazing too. Do what God wants you to do, and it's different for everyone.
Right. I'm really starting to hear that heartbeat more and more, and I'm so glad, because there was a period of time that moms, when I started my parenting career a long time ago, at that time, if you weren't staying home with your kids, you were looked at a little bit with some side eye. Were you a dedicated enough mom? Then it seemed to kind of swing the other direction. What do you mean you're staying home with your kids? And I'm excited. I think it's empowering for women to hear, look, you do you and what God has called you to do. And I think that there is a receptivity that's becoming even more and more powerful, which is what sisterhood should be. It is what it should be, instead of trying everybody to analyze, why aren't you doing life just like I am? I think it's exciting to see a lot of different shades of this. Now, having been in media, not at the level you are, but the in media in the past and now, and also within some other industries that were very male driven, how did you end up in this arena? Was this where you thought you were headed back in the day in college? And how did you prepare to enter something that, not a lot of women necessarily traverse there? What was that process like?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I feel like in secular media, again, we've got so many incredible women. I mean, Deborah Norville is the anchor of Inside Edition, and she's been with our show for over 20 years. And I'm so grateful that I work on a television show where we've got this strong woman that really sets the tone in our newsroom. And I mean, she's been married for many, many years, still married to her first husband, has 3 kids. So I've really been lucky and blessed with a lot of the people that I work with. I've also had really awesome male bosses my entire career. I've been very, very fortunate, and I know that's not the case for everyone, especially of late. When you think about the Me Too movement, you know, I am here in Seattle, Washington at Krista at Spirit 105.3 Radio. I went to this school. There's a small private Christian school connected to this campus, and as a 5-year-old, I toured this radio station, and I remember saying, I want to do something like this, something in entertainment, something in media. So it was always there. And then you go to college and you do the internships. I did like 7 different internships before I got the overnight shift at a classical radio station right out of college. But I just knew I wanted to do something. I've always loved telling stories and performing and the arts and entertainment world. So you got to hustle, though. You got to work hard. I've worked more holidays, as you know this. You got to work holidays. You can't complain. I travel a ton. It is not for the faint of heart. And you got to really love it and really feel called to be here.
Now, you had a stint in football. So talk about that jump as well, because I think that's a fascinating one for women to go into and be the moderator, be the broadcaster for that specific arena and that sport. So what was that like?
Yeah, well, it's a really cool time for female broadcasters in the sports industry. Again, I felt very, very supported. Sure, there are those moments when some of the guys said to me, how can you cover the NFL? You've never played football. And I get that. There are some things I'll never be able to relate on. But I just tried to show up, know my facts, know the teams, understand the game that I'm about to cover. And then I really think that if you do good work, pretty soon the guys went, okay, she can do her job. She can do what we're asking her to do. So don't try to be more than what you're called to be in terms of, I can't have the lingo that a player would have when I've never been on the field. But it was just an awesome experience. Covered Thursday Night Football for 2 seasons. Got to see these athletes that are just, I mean, they've committed their whole life to this sport. I love competition. I love, being the best and training and the sacrifice that goes into it. So that was very, very cool. I got to do it for 2 seasons. And, talk about a cool time for Christian NFL players with social media to be able to get their platform out there, whether it's a Russell Wilson for the Seahawks, Drew Brees with the New Orleans Saints, Nick Boyles now with the Philadelphia Eagles who won the Super Bowl. It's a cool time, and I'm proud of so many of these guys for being role models and proclaiming their faith and just doing good work. Yeah,
it really is exciting to see that they have been given that platform and are wielding it well and are very vocal and with their beliefs. So in your book, Faith in the Spotlight, what was your impetus for writing it? What was the heartbeat that you wanted to get across in that book as a person who is in secular media and is also wanting to live before God the way that you believe He's called you to live?
Well, I got an email a couple of years ago from a pastor in Seattle, and he emailed me and he said, Megan, I have a church full of young, ambitious women of faith. They have big career goals and dreams, but they are terrified they're going to need to compromise their faith to get ahead in their careers. And he said, I know of few people to point them towards, but I know of you. Would you come speak to my church? And Jules, I mean, in so many ways, yesterday I was that girl sitting in church with big goals and dreams that also wanted to honor Jesus and loves the Lord and wanted to say, hey, can't this all work out? And I didn't necessarily get encouragement. I mean, I had a family friend say to me, why would you want to work in entertainment? That's the devil's playground, But listen, I really believe that for some of us, that's exactly where we should be, shining a light in the darkness. And I firmly believe that Christians need to take a seat at the table in all industries, in culture, in life. And for some of us, that's in the incredibly influential world of media. It tells us what to wear, what to buy. Some would say how to think. Then let's get some Christians involved. And I got countless stories of times when I was just somebody in the newsroom raising my hand and offering up a story idea, maybe that had something to do with faith or encouragement or inspiration. And just because I was in the room raising up my hand, that story got on air or a project was developed. So I say, go for it. If God calls you to do it, go for it. But let's talk about it practically, which is why I wrote my book.
Right.
Again, to answer that pastor's email. let's talk about it. Let's talk about, as a female, what it means, to be in an industry that is very difficult on positive body image. Let's talk about mentors. How do you find them in this fast, busy, industry where people don't have a lot of time for you? Let's talk about dating and marriage and my own personal story of abstinence. How can you live that out, in a world where people still think that's, impossible or frowned upon or looked down upon? So the book's very practical, and I tried to just gather in people that I admire to give advice, negotiating a contract, asking for a raise, all kinds of things that, again, in college, in Christian college and in Christian school, I didn't necessarily talk about or learn. And I want to talk about now and say, hey, let's just dive into these topics as believers and figure it out.
I do think there really has been a gap, and that's why I'm so excited about your book, Faith in the Spotlight, because for a generation of women who are beginning this process of determining how to make all the things that they want, we went from you got to be home to you got to give it your all for career. So you're almost like you were being asked to choose between career and family in a way that we've not really asked of guys. We've assumed that guys can kind of somehow navigate both. But when it came to the female conversation, it was almost like one or the other. You got to choose. And so I'm so glad to hear that there is this kind of resource available, because I do think that female mentoring for this kind of a thing has just been not as robust. It just from a practicum, because there haven't been a lot of women who've been able to walk it to this point. I've said before that, apprenticeship is a dying art in this country. We throw kids into college and ask them to pick a major, and they may have zero experience of having even set foot inside a vet clinic, but they're just determined they're going to be a veterinarian. So I love that this book really gives an opportunity to have that mentor experience, that intern kind of experience from somebody who's been there and is walking it currently with a lot of practicum. So what is the difference between Megan Alexander, Inside Edition, covering football, doing the things, and Megan in Nashville? What is the difference there when you go back from New York and take off, put down the microphone and pick up the mommy hat?
Sure. Well, you know this, Jules, with your 8 kids. My 2 boys, for the most part, could care less what I do. I mean, I come home and I'm like, hey, can mommy tell you about who she interviewed? Or, I was on the set of this movie. And they're like, no, please play trains with us. Yeah. Let's play choo-choos, And I absolutely love it. I mean, children ground you. They humble you. They center you. And then, I've been fortunate that my husband has known me my whole life. He always jokes. He says, Meg, I knew you before any of this. And so I think we've been able to develop friendships and try to create a community of just real relationships. Again, that's easier said than done, but I'm so grateful for my hubby and just the fact that, he's just proud of me for being Meg and writing a book and just trying to, shine my light for Christ. He doesn't care about, the celebrity stuff, although he did think the NFL was pretty cool.
I was going to say, that had to make some kind of impression.
I have a Bible study in New York City, which helps me up there. I have a group of women I get together with that all still work in entertainment and media. And then in Nashville, we're involved in our church. My hubby and I put on the coffee ministry at our church. We set up the coffee bar on Sundays, taking my kids to flag football and t-ball and, just all that stuff, which I'm so grateful for. That's important. I mean, because all this could go away tomorrow. You know that. And at the end of the day, if you don't have, what do they say, 5 good friends and community around you, then what's the point of life?
Right. So you alluded to this earlier, and I do think it's such a fascinating question in our culture today. Now, regardless of generation, there have always been those individuals that human beings have been influenced by and impressed by. And, that fan experience is not exactly something new. You can go back into antiquity and see examples of it. But it feels like today we have elevated celebrity, those who are on camera, those who have robust followings, to a level of influence in our lives that is really unprecedented. To me, it feels like. How do you navigate all of that? Because as a broadcaster, if you're going to feature someone on a story that you're going to do or whatever, you're giving them a certain level of voice and influence moving forward. What is it in the human condition today that we are just so triggered by those that we see within a broader media context? And how do we handle that responsibly as people in media or as the managers of our homes to make sure that those who are considered influential by the world don't have as much of a voice and if it's not one that's positive for our families and for our home lives?
I mean, that is the $1,000,000 question, and something that my husband and I talk about all the time as we think about raising our boys and social media. And, you're exactly right with how the world has changed. I mean, one thing that I'm thankful for is that Inside Edition does not do as many of the celebrity stories as you would think. We really cover natural disasters. I mean, I flew down with the Sutherland Springs church shooting in Texas. I mean, talk about an incredible town that answered our questions and shined their light and loved on each other amidst this tragedy. I mean, so many of the people I were interviewing down there, they were quoting scripture. They were clinging to their faith in that horrific time. So I'm grateful that in those moments, I mean, I said to them, I spoke in Houston several months later, and I said, you encouraged the world. The eyes of the world were on you and how you were going to handle this. And they were just being them. It's a small little town. And yet, what a cool opportunity where media can be used as good to get that message out and encourage people. So I'm grateful for that. But I know, like you were saying with celebrities and so forth, the emphasis on being known, making money, being a somebody. I mean, it's a difficult one. I long for true, real friendships. I'll be totally honest with you, Jules. Of course, I have those moments where I wonder, does this person really want to be the friend of Megan? Or do they just want to be my friend because maybe they want to be on TV one day, or
access to your
just
network,
want something from me. Right.
Yeah.
So I think we all have those questions, and it's just, I try to cut through things. I try to ask people about themselves and their kiddos. That's one of the greatest things, tricks, I guess, maybe that I use, tricks in a good way with celebrities, is ask them about their kids. I feel like sometimes the wall comes down when we talk about families or something. So, but I don't know. I probably should ask you. You've got 8 kids. It's the $1,000,000 question. It's one we're navigating now, and I think it is interesting, though. I will say social media has me longing even more for real community. So maybe we're going to swing back around. That's what my husband says. He says, I really think we're going to swing back around maybe and more than ever be longing for authentic community. I only hope.
Right. And I do think there's a lot of validity to online community. I think that it's gorgeous to have access to all kinds of friends, if you will. I'm using air quotes for that, but people that really do speak into your life and have great ideas and great resources for where you're at in your life. And I have a sense there's going to be a reevaluation of who we have promoted as a culture as people who are thought leaders for us. And should they really be there just because of the number of followers they have or the platform they have or the microphone they have, and to be really intentional about all that. Megan and I will be right back with more insight on how she's managing a busy career in New York City while living in Nashville with her husband and 2 kids. But first, it's been incredible here at the podcast to partner with Compassion International over the past few months. We've seen so many kids get sponsored through the generosity of our listeners, and now it's your turn to give back in this season of giving. You've made a list and checked it twice, but there's something you don't want to forget. When it comes to spreading true Christmas cheer this year, you can give a gift that can change the world. For just a little over $1 a day, when you sponsor a child in need through Compassion International, you'll provide health, educational, and spiritual care for that child. You'll spread the joy of the Christmas season to places in the world that needs its light. So make sure you've got this on your list and go to compassion.com/allmomdoes to sponsor a child today. That's compassion.com/allmomdoes. Okay, Meg, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use one of your tricks. Tell me about your kids. Tell me about your 2 boys.
See, and I won't be able to stop now. I'll just keep talking. It's good. I have 2 little boys. Catcher is going to be 3, and his name's Catcher, like baseball catcher.
Love that.
Thank you. And then Chase is 7. My son Chase is 7, and they're just so much fun. Just again, they just love life, and we've got a great little community. They're both in public school. Well, Catcher's in daycare, and Chase is in public elementary school. It's just fun. My husband is very hands-on with them, which I'm so grateful for. And we are here in Seattle visiting grandparents. So my parents are a huge part of our life too. Yeah, it's just cool. I mean, it goes by so fast. He's already 7 and talking about all sorts of crazy things and telling me about dinosaurs and this dinosaur and that dinosaur. And I think, how'd you learn all this, right? I mean, they're all sponges. But what a great responsibility we have, if they are such sponges, to think about what are we doing? What are we saying? I mean, if anything, if my husband and I say it's been the biggest check for us on who are we because we want to raise good kids, it's scary, isn't it? It's scary.
Yeah. It's a huge act of faith, this parenting thing. So now with your husband, It's interesting. I live here in Austin, and one of the adjustments that was interesting for me when we moved here is I would be out at Costco or Sam's during the middle of the day, because I kind of live at Costco or Sam's. Those are kind of some of my haunts. And I would see dads out with babies, dads dressed in more casual wear. And that adjustment I began to make within this community, and this has been over a decade ago, but realizing how many at-home dads we had, or dads who were doing the hustle from the home office and were going to be more engaged in their children's lives. And yet there are still a lot of communities in the U.S. that kind of experience, you would think, who are these dads and what are they doing out in the middle of the day? So how has that been for y'all, making that adjustment with your husband being kind of the guy, all hands on deck while you're up in New York, and within the context of community for you?
There have been quite a few times when we have been in Christian circles and people have naturally assumed that he works, maybe I don't. And we've been in a group and they hear what we do and they look at my husband, and people have literally said to my husband, "You're okay with that?" And my husband's like, "Well, we're a team, so we better both be okay with it." But I think it's sort of just, again, it's a cultural thing. I don't blame folks. I realize that, generations are different in how they look at that stuff. But I'll tell you this, Jules, there have been plenty of times when I've felt more at home or comfortable talking to the guys at a dinner party, because we all talk about travels or careers, than I do with the women in Christian circles, because the women kind of scratch their head and look at me and they're like, "What do you do?" It's getting better, but it has been lonely at times for my hubby and I. And I'm the oldest of the millennials. I'm in my late 30s. And I think it's really an important time for the church to say, hey, you can't offer women's Bible studies at 9 a.m. on weekdays. Us working women can't make it. I can't tell you how many times I've wanted to get involved in a Bible study and I just couldn't show up because I'm a working woman. So in New York City, my friends and I, we said, hey, let's meet at 7 o'clock at night because we know we all can. And we just formed our own Bible study and we go through Beth Moore's, video series ourselves. And then my husband likewise has said, hey guys, I'm the one taking the boys to school in the morning. I can't make the 7 a.m. coffee hour with all the men at the church. So I think we're starting to figure it out more and more. When this book came out, I had people say to me, this is great, but could you talk about your kids and your marriage? Because there's not really a place yet in our church to talk about career with the women. You could talk to the guys group, but they mainly just have male speakers. I can't tell you how many times that has happened. And God bless the women out there and men that have said, I'm just going to create an event for her. Yeah, we may not have a fit for her, but let's just create an event. So it's changing. We're getting better. But that is something. You're onto something there. I think we need to support these up-and-coming young people where both parents work. Maybe it's a stay-at-home dad. How are we supporting them and encouraging them and giving them community?
Right. And, we've definitely discovered that at my home church. And we actually have 3 studies in the evening for women, for this very reason. But the other thing that's changed a lot that's been very interesting, I lead a bigger one on a Tuesday morning at 9:30 a.m., just like you're saying, per formula. But I would say probably 75 to 80% of the women in that Bible study work. And so they have flexibility within their schedules in order to make that happen. Now, that's not everybody's story, so that's not some kind of guilt trip. I'm just saying they have adapted what they're doing in their workday to be able to accommodate that particular study. But I do think churches are going to have to be very receptive to making their programming that's supposed to be helping and feeding and all of these things, creating community, make it match the experiences of the people that they are actually trying to interact with. Because our work worlds, our family lives, definitely, in some ways there's more flexibility, and in some ways it's more intense than ever. And so what are we going to do in the church to meet that? And I do think that women within the faith context need voices like yours, like in your new book, Faith in the Spotlight, to help equip, because we are in some new arenas that we haven't been in before. So as women of faith who are entering the workforce in unprecedented numbers, I think one of the latest statistics I saw was that almost 50% of all households are now, the woman is the primary in terms of the wage earner within the family, whether that is because she's now single or because they've made the same kinds of decisions that some of our families have made, where wife's going to be the one primarily to work, husband's going to be home, whatever that choice has been to get them there. And yet within that context, as women of faith going into the work world, do we need to have our, rhinestone Jesus cross necklace on? Do we need to be carting our Bible into the office? Like, how do we go in as women of faith and yet at the same time understand that not everybody's going to get the deal?
Sure. I think it's different for everyone. I really think you've got to get with your Lord and you've got to decide what works for you. Every job is different. I'm fully aware that there are teachers in this world that cannot talk about their faith or they will get in trouble. Everyone is different. For me, I personally decided that I just wanted to be all about relationships and love people. I have friends from all walks of life, all faiths, all lifestyles, and I love people and I love those relationships. That's the approach that I want to take. I also want to be known for good work first. I believe that's how you get a seat at the table in the first place. Jules, at the end of the day, my boss hired me because he thinks I'm a decent news reporter. And that's it. I got to deliver for him. I've got to do the job well. I've got to be excellent. I've got to deliver for my teammates. And then if there's an opportunity, once you've built those relationships, to just share what you're all about and that your faith is important to you, that's my approach. I think it is not one size fits all. And again, I think that's something that we need to talk about, and maybe there's been some pressure in the past that you do need to wear the cross necklace or whatever. I say, God can work in mysterious ways, in all kinds of different ways, and the Bible is certainly full of those examples. I mean, I personally, my hero is Daniel. He gained the favor of the king. He made his way into the high courts, and yet he still maintained his faith. But who says that you can't, do well in whatever industry or career and be someone that people value and respect and admire and build those relationships? Sometimes I think we put it on ourselves too much instead of just saying, hey, God's got me. He'll let me know.
Yeah. I think it is interesting because sometimes in our desire to be light and salt to the world, we let that work ethic thing slide a little. And I had a teacher in my life who at one point said, you know what? One thing that I think had to have been true about Jesus, if he was following in Joseph's footsteps as a carpenter, then you better believe he was making good tables. He really had the work ethic. I'm sure Paul making tents, if he'd been making tents that were not up to par, were substandard, his testimony then when he went in to try to teach in a community the gospel would have been a little bit watered down, because I think that if I'd bought one of Paul's tents and it fell apart, I would have thought, who is this guy? So I love that great encouragement to remind us that let's bring our A game to our workplaces. And if that also involves bringing a devotional book or a piece of inspirational art that's allowed by your workplace, fantastic. But make sure you're also bringing good work if that's where you've been called to be placed. So within this context of balancing Nashville life and New York life and all of those kinds of things, what are the things that you do as a woman? Because you're giving on a lot of fronts. You kind of have two interesting lives going, split right down the middle of the week. What are things that you do to keep yourself equipped, refreshed, ready to engage back in a strong way with both work or family, depending on where you've been? What are some of the things you like to do?
Gosh, well, my husband is super into fitness, and so I've just been lucky that that's rubbed off on me a little bit. He really inspires me in that way. Otherwise, I think I'd be on the couch eating potato chips. So fitness is a big deal. I mean, I love to do classes because he's doing them, and our son Chase is now starting to do them as he's getting into sports. That's important to just let off the stress that way. I mean, I read a lot. I love to take a long bath,
Yes, one of my fellow bath girls, yes.
That's right. I mean, listen, I like a nice glass of wine. It was the first miracle, everyone. Water into wine.
You're just being biblical, that's all. Well, I think that those moments of self-care are really important. And I think sometimes we can think that it has to look a certain spiritual way or whatever. And to really understand what refreshes you. I have often talked about my husband is a major extrovert. I'm what I call an ambivert. I live somewhere halfway in between. Really love people, but kind of leave it all on the floor and then have to retreat and get kind of refueled again. And to really understand who you are, the most refreshing thing to Mike at the end of a really hard, long day is for us to go into downtown Austin to some majorly crowded venue and for him to make 50 new friends. Like nothing refreshes him more. And I want to retreat back to that bathtub and get that good book and go to that. And so I think to really know who you are and what really refills your tank is so important. And so it sounds like you have a bead on what really definitely gets you fueled up and ready to go back into the game. Now, how do you know when you come off of a difficult story or one that's really, captured your heart? Because even though I recognize that as a reporter, you're something of a voyeur in a positive sense, but it didn't happen to you, but in having to report that and going down and covering that horrific situation down here in Texas in terms of a church shooting, how do you process all of that within your faith and within a way that you're not carrying all that home? Because let's face it, there's a lot of trauma in actually being the storyteller of some of these events that happen in our world. Yeah.
Jules, I'm so glad you asked this because I think it's really important for people to know that we are affected by everything we see and everyone we talk to. And you may see a 2-minute interview on television and you don't know that we stand there and keep talking to those people for hours afterwards. And it's just never going to make air. Or thank goodness for social media nowadays where we can follow up and keep in touch and email folks and see how they're doing. As for taking stories home, listen, I think in some ways it can be a blessing. And I'll just share one quick story with you in terms of trying to be a better person because of what you've covered. The Charlottesville, Virginia riots that happened several years ago where, this neo-Nazi group showed up and so forth. I sit next to an African-American man at Inside Edition. He's my fellow reporter, Les. I love him so dearly. He's an amazing reporter. And as that whole thing was going down, it was a moment for me where I just said, I don't do enough to be part of reconciliation in this country. I grew up in Seattle. In many ways, I don't feel like I always understand the South and everything that the South has been through. And then seeing that and seeing the expressions on my African-American brothers and sisters' faces and just what they were still working through and how painful it still is for so many people in this country, I called up a pastor that I greatly admire and I said, I had just started a podcast and I said, I just want to do a podcast with somebody that can walk us through this. I'm not even totally sure how to do that, but would you help me? And I was aware of a guy in Brentwood, Tennessee, Pastor James Lowe, who has a very diverse church called Bethel World Outreach. And so this pastor that I called said, absolutely, let's call up James. You get him on the podcast. So I called James up and we did this 2-hour podcast that you can find. My podcast is called Inspired with Megan Alexander. And I just said, can we just talk through this? And can you just give me words of wisdom on what people can do that want to support reconciliation in this country, but aren't sure what that means, what they should do, what they should say. And he and I had a great conversation. And so that's an example, Jules, where yes, sometimes you do need to take it home with you and you do need to be a better person because of the stories you've covered. And my husband and I now go to his church in Brentwood, Tennessee, and we feel like sitting in the pew and knowing that it is all the colors of the rainbow and multicultural and very diverse, we are doing something to be a part of, rebuilding unity and reconciliation in this country and in this world. And so that was a moment for me where I just thought, sometimes you got to take the story home. And I did. And I'm not doing anything special, but what are you if you don't try to learn from all these stories again and be better?
Stay curious. I love it. I love it. Megan, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Jules. Loved it.
Connect with Megan on Instagram at Megan J. Alexander 1. That's Megan J. Alexander and then the number 1. And be sure and look for her book, Faith in the Spotlight. You can find me at Instagram and Facebook and Pinterest and all the places as Julie Lyles Carr. Would love to connect with you there. AllMomDoes.com and AllMomDoes on the socials is an incredible place for you to find other women in your season of life and to find inspiration for your mom journey. Let's give a big high five to Donna Toti, our producer, and Rebecca Beckett, our content coordinator. They are the force behind the scenes that gets the podcast out to you each and every week, and I couldn't be more grateful. So do us a favor and subscribe and share and give us a shiny 5-star rating and review. That helps us get the word out about the podcast to others. Next week, we've got a special episode for you with some fun surprises. I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag just yet, but it's an episode unlike anything we've done before, and I can't wait for you to hear it. We're going to laugh, discover some new inspiration, and visit with some old friends. See you next week on the Modern Motherhood Podcast.